really began in Kamloops as a rebellious teenager that I was, growing up in a family of 5, fatherless when I was 8. And I met a young man who still lives in Calgary named Darren. We began to hang out at his house and use recreational marijuana in the presence of his mother. And it turned out she was a devout Marxist-Leninist communist who had traveled to the Soviet Union on several occasions. And she began to give me literature, and of which I began to read, the first being the Communist Manifesto and other pieces of literature. At which point I later left because of unemployment, left Kamloops to go to Edmonton and began to get involved with the communist youth movement in Edmonton. And that then later propelled me into Toronto. When I moved to Toronto, unbeknown to me at the time, on Harvard Street, where I moved in, about 3 blocks from my house was the actual Morgenthau Clinic that would later be flattened by an anonymous bomb that took out the clinic. But I was 3 blocks away, and I happened to just be walking up the street one day, and in front of the Morgenthau Clinic was a barrage of people with their arms linked and a fence that the police had put up, and they were yelling and screaming at a group of people that were sitting on the stairs of the clinic. Well, those people sitting on the stairs of that clinic were Operation Rescue. And the people on the other side was the Ontario Coalition for Abortion Clinics. I asked what was going on, and they explained, and I jumped the fence and joined arms with the Ontario Coalition for Abortion Clinics, and that began my path into the pro-abortion movement. A lot went on in that time. Sneaking women into the clinic late at night. There was a big case, I can't remember her name, but her husband had went to court to try to prohibit her from having her abortion. She was driven to the clinic at about 1 o'clock in the morning as we met her there in her car. Her husband was across the street, I believe. And in she went, and then we all went out and celebrated with drinks that she was able to have her abortion. I can still remember convincing the women not to turn around, not to go home, but to continue to have their abortion procedure. And some of the women were quite wary of not wanting to go through that. From my recollection, all but one of the 5 or 6 women that we had in our living room went through the procedure. OCAC continued quite strongly to the 1988 Supreme Court decision. We made a trip to Ottawa, where we shouted down Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, who was attempting to introduce a new law into the Parliament of Canada, with some form of some minor restrictions, and we were chanting, "No new abortion law, we're never going back." And we were hauled out of the House of Commons. That was on the front page of Maclean's, actually, about a week later. The group of us with a big, large coat hanger that I used to haul around to these demonstrations. Huge coat hanger, about 6 by 8 feet. With the big coat hanger in front of the Parliament Hill. And from the communist movement, I began to get into quite a life of drugs and illicit sex and alcohol, which drove me to leukemia in 1998. At which point the doctor said the condition that I was in, he gave me about a 30% chance of even making it through the bone marrow transplant phase. I went through the successive procedure and recouped my life. But in the middle of it, I began to reflect and look back on those years. And it was at that time that I thought I might want to get things right with God and what I had done and all the abortions that I helped procure. And I put a call into Jim Hughes at the National Campaign Life Office in Toronto. They patched the call through, and the line was pretty quiet at the beginning. Jim knew who exactly I was. I had yelled obscenities at him and his supporters for quite a few years. So I'm not quite sure he had any idea as to why I would be calling him. And I explained that I needed forgiveness and wanted to apologize for all the years of turmoil and hatred and bitterness that I put him and the organization through, and all the abortions that I helped procure. And it's something that I have to live with, continually. God has forgiven me, but I often think of putting a full-page ad in the Globe and Mail and asking to reach out to any of the women that may have gone to that clinic. It's interesting. when I had my cancer, I became unable to procure children because it killed your sperm count, and I find that interesting, that I spent so long destroying lives. On the next side of eternity, I am pretty convinced that we will all see those lives, the faces of those lives that were torn from the womb, and that will be an interesting day for many people, including myself.